Well, LSU is getting a very familiar name back to the boot. What does that mean for LSU, for this recruiting class, and for that position group in 2023? We'll get into that plus so much more on today's edition of Locked on LSU.
You are Locked on LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, thank you for making Locked on LSU your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, and we're on YouTube as well. And of course, we are part of the Locked on Network, your team every day. My name is Caroline Fenton, and I am your host, as I am every day. I graduated from LSU. I've been covering LSU football and other sports since 2016, and I'm now a sports talk radio host in Nashville, Tennessee. Before we get into it, I want to remind everybody that we are doing a Mailbag Wednesday this week. We'll be doing that every Wednesday for the next foreseeable weeks and months. So get your questions in however you want to send those questions in. If you want to comment them on the YouTube page, feel free to do that. If you want to tweet them in, you can send them in at Locked on LSU or my Twitter handle, which if you're watching the YouTube page, it's right below at Caroline Fenton 1. You can tweet them at me. You can DM them to me. However you want to get those questions in, make sure to get those questions in for a Mailbag Wednesday. We'll be doing, recruiting questions, early signing day questions, which, by the way, is tomorrow. So I'll have a full early signing period breakdown in tomorrow's show. We'll have a full breakdown of all of the players that LSU has collected from that period from December 21st to the 23rd. We'll have a full breakdown coming up next week. But make sure to get those questions in for a Mailbag Wednesday. Nothing's off the table. But let's get into it because LSU has a very familiar name coming back to the state of Louisiana. Aaron Anderson, a wide receiver who spent his freshman season at Alabama, has officially committed to join LSU in the 2023 season. Now, he announced that he was entering the transfer portal just a few weeks ago. He was a 5-star recruit coming out of Edna Karr High School in New Orleans. He was the number 1 player out of Louisiana in the 2022 class. I mean, if you follow high school football pretty closely in the state if you city of New Orleans, of course you would know that name. But if you follow high school football in the state, you would know that Aaron Anderson was a name that you simply couldn't hear enough of. Aaron Anderson was probably one of the more electric high school football players in quite some time in the state of Louisiana. And that is saying something considering how much talent, not just the city of New Orleans pumps out on a year-to-year basis, but also just historically. So, I mean, it's a name you couldn't ignore in 2020 and 2021 when he had his final few seasons at Edna Karr High School. But he had already originally committed to LSU. He's kind of an LSU kid, grew up just in an hour down the road from Baton Rouge. He was an LSU fan his whole life growing up, committed to LSU. And then when Ed Orgeron got fired, he decommitted and then decided to go to Alabama. Don't blame him. He's one of the top recruits in the country. He didn't want to go into a not for certain program, so decided to go to Alabama. If you want to go into an established program where you know exactly what you're going to get, I mean, Alabama is as good of a place as ever. But spent his first season at Alabama, didn't record any stats. He did suffer a knee injury in the offseason that kept him off the field for quite a bit of the season. He had a season debut against Austin Peay in the second to last week of the season, mid to late November, but didn't record any stats then. And was it the knee injury that kept him off the field? Was it a depth issue that kept him off the field to where he didn't see the field until the second to last week of the season? I don't know, quite frankly, but didn't record anything at his time in Alabama. But if you saw him in high school, you know that he is one heck of a player. I mean, looking at his high school career, he recorded 6,000 total yards, which is just insane, considering that he really only contributed in sophomore, junior, and senior year in 3 years in high school. 6,000 total yards, averaging 2,000 yards-ish a season. That's absolutely insane. And what I think might even be a more impressive stat is his special teams contributions. Because 6,000 total yards, that's offensively, receiving, rushing, and special teams stats as well. He had 20 return touchdowns in his high school career at Edna Karr. In his senior year, against John Curtis. He had 3 kickoff returns for a touchdown. 3 kickoff returns to the house in one single game against John Curtis. And he had 5 special team touchdowns that season, 3 of which came in just one single game. So if you are somebody like me who's been real fed up with special teams recently, this is going to be a guy that gives me a whole lot of hope. Now, Brian Polian, don't mess this up. Don't ruin a good thing, because this is going to be huge, not just for the wide receiver core, but also for special teams. And I'll get into more detail into that coming up next. But in a senior season, in addition to some of those special teams contributions, had 926 total receiving yards in those 12 games, 74 receptions, and 14 receiving touchdowns that year. I mean, he is one heck of a player. He's a dynamic player. He's incredibly speedy and quick. You don't return 20 touchdowns, 20 return kickoffs for a touchdown 20 times in your career if you're not incredibly speedy. But he marks the first transfer portal commit for LSU's 2023 class. They have 25 committed freshmen so far. Of course, like I just mentioned, the early signing period starts tomorrow, and then it'll extend through the rest of the week. So 25 freshmen committed so far. Aaron Anderson, the first transfer portal commitment of that class. Now, there's a bunch of offers that have already been sent out. Some of those offers are to players that have already committed to play elsewhere. Some of those offers are to players that still have yet to make those commitments. So there will be more transfer portal commitments to come down the pipe. I mean, remember, the transfer portal is open for another month. So this is just the beginning of many, many dominoes to fall. I'm expecting probably a lot more names to come after Christmas time, after players take their finals, after they get wrapped up, and after the new year. A lot more of those names will come in. But Aaron Anderson, local kid, a New Orleans kid, coming back to LSU after he spent his freshman season at Alabama. I mean, I think this is huge for so many reasons. And I'll tell you exactly why I think this is huge for so many reasons. We'll get into that coming up next. But first, I want to tell you about LinkedIn Jobs. So these days, it can feel really stressful with every new potential new hire. You don't want to gamble with somebody that you don't think is a guarantee. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. So that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. It helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. I work for a radio station, and we were in need of a producer like stat. We needed a producer really badly. We needed to fill that hole. We needed to do it immediately because it was right in the middle of football season. So we went to LinkedIn Jobs, and they were able to find us the best quality candidates, and they did it for free, which is the best part. So it's super easy. This is how I did it. I went to LinkedIn. I posted the job. I posted that the radio station that I work for was hiring for a producer. And then I added the purple hashtag hiring frame to our LinkedIn profile to spread the word that we are hiring. They've got super simple tools like screening questions that make it super easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience, so you can quickly prioritize who you would like to hire. We're about to finish up this year. We're going to start the next year. You want to start next year on the right foot, and finding the right team member can help you do that. And it's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That is linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Well, thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. Make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. The biggest stories around the sports world in 20 minutes or less, plus instant reactions, game recaps, and Locked On's take of the day. Locked On Sports Today, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. So Aaron Anderson, like I mentioned, a former 5-star receiver out of Edna Karr High School in New Orleans, spent his freshman year at Alabama. He decommitted from LSU whenever Ed Orgeron was fired, making his way back to the boot for the 2023 season when he announced that he was entering the transfer portal just a few weeks ago. So what does this mean for LSU? Why is this such a big pickup for LSU? I think there's plenty of reasons, both on the field and off the field reasons. First of all, on the field, more wide receiver depth. I mean, you're never going to turn your head to more wide receiver depth. And this is something that I talked to John Garcia Jr. about last week. Of course, you can find all of our old podcasts on your preferred podcast platform and on YouTube as well. I was like, look, John, am I wrong in thinking that LSU doesn't really need to go out and seek more wide receivers. Kayshon Boutte coming back, Malik Nabers coming back. You got, 4 really solid wide receivers coming in this class. Am I wrong for thinking that with those 10, the 6 returners and the 4 freshmen, that LSU doesn't really need to seek out any more wide receivers rather? And he was like, you can never have enough depth. And he was 100% right. Because even though I didn't think that LSU needed to seek it out, you're never going to turn it away, especially a player with so much talent like Aaron Anderson does have, and especially with a player that can bring you special teams contributions. Those kinds of things are invaluable. So you never are going to turn away to wide receiver depth. So looking at LSU's wide receiver room for the 2023 season, of course, like I mentioned, you've got Kayshon Boutte returning. Huge. Malik Nabers returning. He proved to be Jaden Daniels' favorite target this year. Huge. Brian Thomas, a sophomore coming back for his junior season, can get a little bit more reps. He had a fine season this year and only had only gained more experience and only can use that to his advantage for his junior season. Kyren Lacy, of course, coming back. Chris Hilton, who redshirted this past year, he will be back next year. And then Landon Ibieta, who's a true freshman this past year, was a 3-star wide receiver recruit coming out of Manaville High last year. He's a guy who I expect to see a good bit in the bowl game the next couple of weeks. We'll get into bowl game stuff. That'll be next week's stuff. So that's your returning wide receivers. And then in 2023, you've got Shelton Sampson, of course, a local Baton Rouge kid out of Catholic High. Jalen Brown, a 4-star wide receiver out of Miami. Now, if he decides to stick with his commitment to LSU, that's kind of up in the air. But Shelton Sampson is a pretty, staunch hard commit. And then you've got a 4-star Kyle Parker and Kai Prian out of the New Orleans area as well. Kyle Parker out of Texas. So that's what your room is looking like. And then you add Aaron Anderson into the mix, a player who didn't get a ton of college experience. So he'll need to gain that. He'll need to get that under his belt, but also gives you those special teams contributions. So this wide receiver room is stacked. You've got new talent. You've got returning talent, you've got experienced talent, and you've got guys that can learn from some of these older guys as well. And you've also got, young talent that can come in and contribute right away. Shelton Sampson and Jalen Brown absolutely can be 2 of those wide receivers that, although they're young, they can contribute right away. Let's not forget that that's one of Brian Kelly's philosophies going into the 2023 season. Is that this is a program that wants to be built through freshmen. So wide receiver depth, that's what Aaron Anderson's commitment brings you. The second thing that I mentioned, special teams, punt return, kick return. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord. Get a little bit more special teams talent. Brian Polian, don't mess this up. I'm looking at you, Brian. Don't mess this up. Because, Aaron Anderson is a proven commodity in special teams. He is a proven punt return, kick return threat. He has showed you he can do it. LSU struggled with punt returns, kick returns. First of all, just catching them. That was one problem. And the second was doing something with them and using that to their advantage to get better field position. So I think that Aaron Anderson being one of those guys that we've seen, like he can be really solid and can really help you on special teams. That's going to be huge for a special teams unit that really, really, really struggled mightily over this past year. And the third thing, more of an off the field thing that Aaron Anderson's commitment is bringing LSU, but still important nonetheless. Because Brian Kelly spoke with the media on Saturday and talked about some of his philosophies for what he wants this 2023 class to be and what he wants to build at LSU. So 2023 and beyond. And keeping guys in state was one of those things. This was Brian Kelly on his more geographical philosophy for his recruiting classes.
We're going to identify the best prospects, throughout the country. And you'll see that in this signing class. We'll have players from the Northeast, from the Midwest, from, the West Coast. But our base will be Louisiana and the South. But I don't think you can, when you're LSU and you have a brand that is so recognizable throughout the entire country, you can't have blinders on either, where you go, oh, I'm just in Louisiana and I'm not going outside it. So our scope and vision is national, but it's not like we're pulling, 4 guys out of every state. We're going to have a heavy influence in the state of Louisiana like we should, but we're going to know where the best players are in the country as well.
So there you go. Brian Kelly says we want our foundation to be Louisiana. And while that means recruiting Louisiana, while that means looking into high schools across the state, that also means looking into the transfer portal for kids from Louisiana that have Louisiana ties. That's something that Brian Kelly mentioned, not in his Saturday press conference, but in the past, was when they bring in transfer guys, they want them to have some sort of connection to the coaching staff, to the state, to the school. So, for example, Mac Markway is a tight end out of St. Louis, Missouri. Well, Robert Steeples was a high school coach in St. Louis, Missouri. He coached on the same team in the same school that Mac Markway came from. So that's your connection right there. Even though he's not a Louisiana kid, even though he doesn't have LSU roots, he still has ties to the program. And I think here you're seeing that with Aaron Anderson, is that he is from New Orleans. He's from Louisiana. He loves LSU. He grew up loving LSU. He's a Louisiana and LSU kid. So that's really big, that's Brian Kelly's priority, is bringing in kids from the state, keeping in-state talent in-state. So even if you couldn't do that last year, you're bringing back in-state talent to contribute to LSU. And I think one thing, beyond Aaron Anderson, as important as his commitment is, one thing that's really refreshing for me to see, and I think Aaron Anderson is a microcosm of this, is an example of this, is that Brian Kelly has been very clear with his philosophy and his vision and his plan. He wants to keep in-state kids in-state. That's just one of those things. He also mentions, building with freshmen, so on and so forth. The refreshing thing is I see that vision coming to fruition. He's telling us his plan, and he's going with that plan. The plan is to build with a foundation with kids from Louisiana. Well, your first commitment via transfer portal in the 2023 class is a kid that was the top ranked recruit in the state of Louisiana just last year. I see the vision. I see the plan. He's not just telling us these are things that he wants to do. He's showing us, he's telling us this is what I'm going to do. And then he's doing those things. And I think that builds a certain level of, I don't want to use the word trust, but I'll use it anyways. I think it builds a certain level of trust and credibility within those coaching staff, that they have a vision, they have a plan, and you know what? They're doing it. So I think this brings Aaron Anderson, again, a former 5-star recruit out of Edna Karr High School. I think this brings wide receiver depth. It brings a special teams threat that LSU just didn't have and missed mightily this season. And I think it just aligns with Brian Kelly's commitment to the state of Louisiana and his plan and his vision for this team moving forward. You can't ignore Florida and Mississippi and Texas and California and Idaho for that matter. But the foundation is Louisiana. This is LSU. You got to keep in-state talent in-state. But coming up next, what's left to recruit in the transfer portal? We will get into that coming up next. But before we do that, I want to tell you that you need to keep yourself and others safe. So did you know that driving high is also considered driving under the influence? A lot of people don't know that. A lot of people think it's just drinking and driving. But driving under the influence of marijuana is against the law in every single state, even in states where marijuana is legal. That means that you driving high could get you a DUI. And if you think that law enforcement officers can't tell you when you're driving high, you are wrong. Your friends can tell, your coworkers can tell, your parents can tell, everyone can tell. So what makes you think that law enforcement officers don't know when you're driving high? Driving under the influence of marijuana can slow your response time and change how you perceive time and speed, which is dangerous for yourself and others. So even if you think that you're fine to drive when you're high, you're not. Because the bottom line is, if you feel different, you drive different. And driving high is driving under the influence. So remember, drive high, get a DUI paid for by the NHTSA. So LSU got their first commitment in the transfer portal. Aaron Anderson adding some wide receiver depth, adding some much needed special teams depth as well. So that was the first commitment in this 2023 transfer portal class. So what's left? What else does LSU need to do a little bit of shopping for? What else does, Santa Kelly need to bring us through the transfer portal? We'll have a much more clear vision for exactly what LSU needs and the depth that they need after this early signing period, because there are a bunch of names that are out there. I know, look at Desmond Ricks as a name that we have talked about in depth over the past few weeks. We'll get even more in depth into Desmond Ricks tomorrow, since it is an early signing period. So be sure to check that out before all of these players, put on their hats and sign their letters of intent. But we'll have a more clear vision once we get a good idea of what talent LSU is getting in through this 2023 recruiting class. But I look at tight end. Tight end is still absolutely a position of need for LSU. And of course, Cole Taylor entered the transfer portal. You got Mason Taylor, who's going to be holding down the fort in the tight end position in the 2023 class. But also, LSU needs a little bit more depth and needs a little bit more experience at that position. So I'm looking at tight end. So, look around at some of these commitments across the country through the transfer portal and see, okay, where does LSU fit in? How can LSU fill that position of need at the tight end position? Also, pass rush and defensive line absolutely is going to be a position of need. Nicholas Harbor is one name through the 2023 class who's, entering. He's a senior this year, entering college football. He is a edge rusher, one of the top edge rushers in the country. He's the top recruit out of the DC area. He will, I can only assume, sign his letter of intent over the next couple of days. He's going to be a guy that's a true freshman, but can contribute to your team right away. Now, LSU is on his, top 5. But, most recent conversations shows that, Maryland and South Carolina, some schools closer to home, might be more so in his wheelhouse, might be teams that he's leaning toward now that we're getting to the early signing period in the next couple of days. But Nicholas Harbor is still high on LSU, and LSU absolutely still is in the mix. So I think that if Nicholas Harbor does sign, that at least takes away the need for, multiple defensive linemen, like 4 or 5 defensive linemen or pass rushers in this transfer portal class, but still doesn't eliminate the need for a defensive lineman or a pass rusher. Also, corners. You can truly, truly never have enough corners. You can never have enough corners. So I think even though, LSU is going to be picking up some cornerback depth in the 2023 class, you still need to get some seniority, need to get some experience in there. So I'm looking at tight end, I'm looking at defensive line. Running back is also another name or another position group that I think LSU needs to look at. Josh Williams is going to be a name that we absolutely adore. We have this past year and we will moving forward, but that's another one is running back depth, and I know Brian Kelly said that he wanted to build a foundation with true freshmen, but you are going to need to get some experience and some depth at those positions. And LSU has extended offers to players across the country. Some of those players have decided to go elsewhere. Some of those players, like I mentioned, have yet to make their announcements, have yet to commit. But those are all positions of need that I'll look for is tight end, running back, defensive line, and pass rusher, and also cornerback. Absolutely need cornerback depth. And Desmond Ricks will make his commitment, I assume, tomorrow on the 21st, if not tomorrow, in this early signing period. So that also will eliminate some of the need for cornerback depth, but still doesn't eliminate it entirely. That's going to do it for me today. Thank you for making Locked on LSU your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up on tomorrow's episode, a full early signing period preview. Players that I'm looking at, what LSU needs in this class, kind of Brian Kelly, what he's looking at in terms of numbers for this class. We'll get into that on tomorrow's episode, but make Locked on Sports today your second listen. Peter Bukowski brings you the biggest stories from around the sports world in 20 minutes. Get the analysis and opinions before anyone else with our local and national experts and insiders. Locked on Sports Today podcast available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.